Hello. So, how are you? So, how do you optimize a large Angular app which has lots of features and lots of components? Now, one of the first points that you should do is to add lazy loading to your app. Now, in this video, I'm going to show you the different ways that modern Angular provides you to add lazy loading to your app. And there are really convenient methods that you can use at any level of your app. So, you can do it on the root level, as you can see here, and you can do it on nested roots, and you can also do it within your pages or within your components right down to a specific part of the template in your component that you want. Okay, so but first, what is lazy loading? Now, lazy loading is a technique on the web which we use for delaying the loading of your application until the user actually needs it. So for example, in this case, you would see that the user probably comes or initializes the app by the dashboard component. Now, at this point, we don't actually know that the user would want to see the content, the analytics, or the comments. So then why do we load it? Well, we don't need to load it. And lazy loading is exactly that you are only going to load it when the user actually clicks on it or when the user is actually interested in it and shows that interest, all right? But what actually happens when you add lazy loading? When you add lazy loading, it creates separate chunks or separate modules or separate parts of the app. And so this means that your initial bundle size will become less. So in this case, the app that we have here, you can see that the initial bundle size here, you have your main.js as 36 KB. Now, this is a smallish app, but if you keep adding features to it, you are going to see that your bundle size is going to increase and your loading time is also going to increase because the browser has to download all of that JavaScript initially before the app even shows itself to you. So then when you add lazy loading, you reduce that bundle size, and as you reduce the bundle size, it also reduces the initial loading time, leading to happy users and users who are likely to stay on your site longer because they see it as fast. So let me just give you a simple overview of this app before we start adding lazy loading to it. So this is a simple app in which I'm building it on top of the YouTube sidebar that I built previously. So we have some top level routes here, the dashboard, content, analytics, and comments. And then we have second level or the nested routes, which are videos, posts, and gallery within the content. And I've represented this using the material tabs interface, just like it is in the YouTube studio, in which you have the content distributed inside of the content section. And then within the each of the nested routes, we have some content. But for the video specifically, we have other subcomponents as well. So, for example, we have the official Angular YouTube player component here, so that we can allow the user to play this video right here and then if the user wants it. All right. So we have different levels of components, and let's see how we can add lazy loading to all of them. So the first point is to add lazy loading to our top level routes here. Okay, so let's go to the code and let's see our main app.roots file. So if you look at the main app.roots file, it's pretty explanatory and it's pretty simple, just like a normal roots file is in Angular. And you can see that we are using the component property of the roots, in which we have to directly specify the imported component from here. You add an import statement at the top here, and you use that same component here. Now, for lazy loading, we need to convert that into an import statement, a dynamic import statement. So what we're going to do is that we're going to um, replace this component with load component. Now, this load component takes in a dynamic function. So a function. So we are going to specify an arrow-based function here, and we are going to start with import here. All right. And then in this import, we are going to go to our pages, the dashboard, and the dashboard component file. And since the component is inside of our dashboard, this file, we then have to use then here as well. And then we are going to say that, okay, if it's a module, a sort of an ECMA module, then we want to specify the component within it here. All right. So now we can remove this from here actually. And this is actually the starting point of, not bundling this component in the main bundle. So we're going to remove this and all references to it. Now this import statement basically signals to Angular that this should be packaged separately and is going to load when this route actually is visited. All right. So let's try this out. And when you save this, the first thing you're going to see here is that a chunk file is generated here. Okay. So you can see that the main file is here 29. Now it was 36 kilobytes before. Now it is separated. The 5 KB has been separated because that was a dashboard component. So as you add lazy loading to your app, you're going to see that Angular divides up your app and splits up your app into different chunks. And this is an indication that they're going to be lazy loaded. All right. So It's lazy loading it. Now let's see this in action here. So let's say we are refreshing this, and a good way to do that is to go in the network tab, and we're only gonna interested in the JavaScript part of it because we want to see what is being loaded when the app loads. So now when we refresh this content videos one, you can see that a lot of things load here. But now when we go to the dashboard, we're gonna see the dashboard chunk is loaded separately here. And now when you look in here, you're gonna see that basically different components are imported here, the components which are related to the dashboard itself. And you can see the dashboard component is also loaded here along with them. So the dashboard component and all of the dependencies of the dashboard component are loaded only when the dashboard root is navigated to. Okay, so this works. You can see the syntax is a bit cumbersome. You have to write the import statement and then you have to refer to the component itself. Now you can shorten this up by quite a lot. If you just add a small change, you go to your dashboard component and you add the default class to it. And so we don't actually need to specify the component here. We can simply just do it like this. So this is simple enough. Let's try this out again. And you can see nothing actually changes. The chunk is the same and the app works the same as well. So if you go in the content, we load this content again, we clear this. When we click on dashboard, you can see the separate chunk is loaded. So this works pretty nicely and with lesser code and more cleaner syntax. All right, so let's do it for all of our apps. So I'm going to go in the content component, make this default. I'm going to go in the analytics component, make this default. And I'm going to go in the comments component and make this default as well. All right. Now, of course, when we do that, we are going to face with all of these errors because now we can't import these components. So here we're going to remove them then because we don't need it. And then we are going to replace this component with load component here. So instead of dashboard, we are going to make this content, right? Instead of dashboard here, we're going to make this analytics, right? And instead of comments here, we're going to make this, instead of dashboard here, we're going to make this comments. Great. So now we have three more chunks as you can see. So more code separated, even lesser bundle size here. You can see it keeps reducing and our load times are going to reduce as well. Okay. So now when we load here, you can see whenever we click on content, only the content related stuff is loaded. When we click on analytics, that chunk is loaded. And when we click on comments, you can see the comments component here is loaded as well. Okay, so the top level lazy loading works and it's as simple as replacing the component with load component and making our components as default class. All right. But one thing you will notice here is that the content children are not lazy loaded. So you can see that when we click on posts here, you can see that nothing happens, nothing loads in the JavaScript, which means that this is sort of the main bundle part of the content bundle itself. It's not being separately lazy loaded. So what we can do is that for adding it to the nested roots, we can do the same thing. We can copy load component here and replace this with the videos, posts and the component here as well. And that is going to work fine. But there is a better way for nested roots. And that is by keeping these nested roots separately in a separate roots file. So let's try doing that. So what we're going to do that is we're going to go in content here and we're going to create a file here. We're going to call this content.roots.ts. So we're just going to copy this whole object here and we are going to go here and add an array and then just copy this object here. All right. It provides a nice categorization of your components in a specific roots file. All right. So this load component, we need to change the path here. So this is then just going to be content and content.component. And for the children, what we want to do is we just want to add the same thing. But before doing that, obviously we need to change these to the default class as well. So let's make it better here. So we're going to do it default class for the videos component. And for the post component, we are going to do the same, export default class. And then for the gallery component, we are going to do the same, export default class. And let's save this. And then here we can just simply use the same load component here. Okay. Because we want the nested roots to be lazily loaded as well. So we're going to use the same thing here. Let's call this content and videos and video. Okay. Similarly, let's go in posts. So let's call this posts. And then in gallery, we are going to call this a gallery here. Okay, so you have all of your nested roots lazy loaded as well. And then you have this content root. So we want to make this as a default as well. So we're going to export this as default content roots here. Okay. So now we can go back to our main roots file and we can basically just remove this. Also, we need to do one more thing, and we need to make this path as an empty path because we're going to specify content here. All right. So now we can remove all of this here and we can simply do this load children. Now, load children is a way to lazily load a group of components. We used to use this for the ng modules as well, and we can also use it for roots file. So here we're going to use it with the roots file that we just created. So we're going to do lazy load children, and we are just going to use an import statement. And for the import statement, we are going to specify pages, content, and the content roots. Now, since we have made it default, we don't need to do anything else. So now let's see whether it loads all of the children or along with this content section as well. So let's save this. It's giving a little issue here. Yeah, so we have imported all of these here, and we can now remove this so that we can. And now when we save this, the first thing you're going to see this as that you have more chunks in the lazy chunks file here, and you can see that we have our content roots also lazily loaded, and within that we have our videos, the posts, and the gallery component as well, which are actually nested roots. All right, and you can see the main JS file is now reduced to only 15 KB because we have split out all of our roots in different chunks. All right, so now when we go back to our app, we can now simply see the power of lazy loading for all of our roots, including the nested roots. And now you can see that when we load the app first, we are going to see it only loads the dashboard chunk initially. But when we click on content, you can see it loads up 3 chunks. So one of them will be the content chunk, the content roots file, and then it also loads the videos content lazily loaded, which is a child content of here. And before that, you can also see that it also loads a material tabs component. Now, the material tabs component is a third party module. It's using the material components. So you can see that this is only loaded when we actually go to the content, because this is the only place where it's used. This is a good example of seeing how you can lazily load different components, heavy components or heavy third party component libraries, which you only want to load in specific places in your app. All right, and this chunk is basically the videos component, and this chunk is basically the content component, and this is the content roots file you can see here. All right, and as you go deep down, you can see that when you click on posts, you are going to see that for the post component, you can see that it loads a material card because this is the only place where the material cards are being used. And obviously, if the user does not want to see the post, then we don't need to load the material cards. And in the gallery, you can see it's just an image, so there's nothing more except for the gallery chunk here. All right, so for most of your apps, just adding this root level lazy loading using load component and load children is going to be more than enough, and you're going to see a lot of performance improvement in the initial load times because the initial bundle times are going to improve as well. Okay, but there is more. So with modern Angular now, you can actually add lazy loading to not only the roots but also to components within components, and even down to a part of the component, even a part of your small part of your template if it needs be. And that is by using the new defer block, which Angular introduced in, I think, Angular 60 or near that. But now they're stable, I think, in Angular 18, so you can use it in production as well. Now, there's a very nice guide on deferrable views. You can see on the angular.dev, the new documentation website for Angular, and it has a very nice set of options and all of the placeholders and triggers that you can actually use with the defer block. So it's worth a read if you are just getting introduced to this concept of the defer block. Now, in the case of our application, you can see that we have our videos list here, and we are using the Angular YouTube Player package here. But you can imagine that every user does not want to play the video. Some users might only want to see the list of videos and maybe look at the description, maybe look at the date or the date of publishing or something like that. So they might not be interested in actually playing the video. But then why do we load the YouTube Player package eagerly? That is, we load it all of the time, even when the user does not need it. So this is a good candidate to add component level lazy loading or granular lazy loading using the defer block. Okay, let me also tell you a bit about how I built this. So I am using the YouTube data API here to get a list of my videos. And if I show you the code here of the videos component, you will see that I have a simple list of my video IDs, and I'm using the YouTube Data API, this endpoint here, and I'm passing in the video IDs here in the encoded format, and I'm just setting the videos when I get that using the JavaScript fetch function in a very simple way. And now I'm using the YouTube Data API key here because that's required, but I'm going to comment it out in the code so that you can add your own. You can get it free from the developer console on Google. And I'm going to give a link in the description which explains how you can get this data API key. All right. Okay. So this is just a list of my videos. So I have all of the data here, but I use the YouTube player to actually allow the user to play that video. Okay. So where do we want to add the defer block here? So we need to add it surrounding this YouTube player component. So what are we going to do? We are just going to use the defer block here. Now for the defer block, we have a section here in which we can specify the options for the defer block. And it's all declarative, so that's really nice. We don't need to add any code to our component file and do anything programmatically or imperatively. So here we are going to specify when exactly we need the component within it or the part of the template within it to actually load. So in this case, there are some on triggers that are the most common that we can use, and one of them is on interaction. Now, on interaction means that when you're going to click on that specific component place, then it's going to lazy load the component file, it's going to load the chunk, and it's going to load the component. We also have on hover, and we also have other interactions. Also, viewport interaction, in which you're going to scroll to that specific component and it's going to load at that time. So, there are other options, and you can refer to the documentation here that I just showed you here. It has a very nice guide to all of the options here. Okay, but let's come back to this, and initially let's see that we want to keep it on hover here, and let's put the YouTube player inside of it. Now remember, on hover is sort of similar to the pattern where the main YouTube interface also has the same pattern, and you can see that you have your videos, thumbnails are showing up, but when you put your mouse over them, you can see that they start to autoplay. So it's sort of a similar thing, not exactly, because it's using some more clever strategies to use that, but we can use a simple hover for now in this case. Okay, but it gives an error here, and it says that hover trigger with no parameters requires a placeholder block. And why that is a good practice, or why that is necessary in this case, is because when you need to trigger the lazy loading on hover, it needs to have some element on which to do that. All right, so it needs to have a sort of a placeholder behind it, and also for reasons of cumulative layout shift, we need to have some sort of placeholder before we actually load our component, because otherwise there would be nothing, and when the component loads, it's going to take up more space and it's going to shift your layout. So in order to prevent layout shift, it is a good practice then to always use placeholders of the same dimensions, of the same size as your component that you're going to load or your image that you're going to load, so that you don't get that Core Web Vitals issue when you deploy this site. All right, so what we need to do here is then we need to add a placeholder block along with this. Now in the placeholder block, we need to specify the placeholder that should appear and that can be interacted with so that the user can play the video. All right, so let's create a div here, and within this div we can first we can add a class to it called placeholder, and this will basically be the image, the thumbnail image, and the source. As I said that I already have the data for this from the YouTube Data API, so I can simply use the video dot snippet and dot standard and dot URL. This is a standard URL thumbnail that we get for any video. For this image, we need to add some styling obviously for this and make these dimensions equal to the YouTube player dimensions here as well. So to do that, we're gonna add it to our styling here, and let's add a placeholder style here, and within that we're gonna add an image style here. So first of all, for the placeholder, we also wanted to add a cursor pointer to it so that the user knows that it can be clicked or it can be hovered over. And then I have some styles here that I want to add here just so that we save some time here. So we have the same width and height, and we have a border radius to give it a nice look. And then we have an object fit cover so that the image covers that whole div. All right, so let's save this and let's see how this looks. And we can see that everything looks the same, except that now this basically is just an image. And in fact, let's load it again, and let's go in our network tab again. And now when we hover over this, you can see that the YouTube player component is only loaded when we hover over it. Now, of course, it's not auto playing it, so we need to add a sort of meter here, and let's call this and in these player variables we can send autoplay as this is going to autoplay the video as soon as it loads. Okay, so let's just save this again and let's try this again. And now when we go in our videos and we hover over any of our app, you're going to see that it starts playing the video automatically just as we would want it to. When we try this out, you're going to see that it starts the video as well. Okay, and more importantly, you can see that it loads only when we actually want it to, right? So, but of course, it gets a bit irritating when the user or sort of mistakenly also hovers over them. Actually, a better practice in this case is to use it in the interaction way, so that you can user can reliably indicate that okay, I want to listen, I want to watch this. So now when we click on the component itself, you're going to see that the YouTube player component is loaded and all of the other embed stuff is loaded only when the user actually indicates that it's going to play this video. One issue that you should be mindful of is that the component that you want to lazy load using the defer block has to be a standalone component. So here you can see I have loaded the standalone part of this component. I could have also loaded the YouTube module along with it, and that would have contained the YouTube player, but it would not have resulted in lazy loading of this YouTube player component itself. So this is sort of a restriction, and if you have a third-party package which does not allow, a standalone component, then you can sort of create a wrapper standalone component which contains that module-based component, and then you can defer on that component, and that is also going to lazy load it and work just like it would be in a standalone component. So that is just one caveat. Otherwise, this is a really nice way, and you can then continue sort of optimizing your app after this. For example, you could add maybe lazy loading here on the post if it makes sense, and on the gallery as well if it makes sense. But for the most part, you're going to be adding lazy loading to your roots. And in rare cases, or in cases where we have really heavy components that you want to load, or you have lots of components that you want to accommodate on a single UI, and in that case it makes a lot of sense for you to have lazy loading of that specific components using the defer block. So in short, Angular provides a lot of lazy loading options for you now, and you can use any of these options to lazy load different stuff and improve your bundle size, boost your performance as much as your app needs in your specific set of circumstances. The code for this is available in the link in the description. And if you liked this video, this short guide to lazy loading in modern Angular, please like this video and also subscribe to the channel so that it can reach more people like you. Thanks for watching, and I'm going to come up with something interesting for my future videos as well.